Welcome to this slideshow. I'm Rosie Trevelyan, and my aim is to give you a scaffolding that you can use to think about your own project. And I'm sure you'll agree that no two projects are the same, and you'll have useful experiences and knowledge that you can apply to those ideas I'm showing you here. Everything I cover in the slideshow will be useful both in designing your conservation project and also in how to communicate it when writing proposals. Are you ready? Let's go! So the very first question you'll ask yourself in any project is, what conservation problem do you want to solve? Because understanding the problem is really key to designing your project. If you know what problem it is that you're looking at, you'll know how to go about designing a project to solve it. And we also need to be able to communicate this problem when writing a proposal, for example. And we'll be talking a lot about proposal writing throughout this whole module and indeed the whole online masterclass. And of course, it's not just communicating it in a project proposal, but communicating about the conservation problem to our stakeholders and other key parties. So having identified the problem, we really need to understand it more. And in particular, we need to know what the causes of this problem are. And we often divide these into threats and drivers. So threats are the kind of pressures on the species or habitats or ecosystems that you're looking at, or indeed even the livelihoods you might be working with. And the drivers are the underlying reasons for those threats. So you can see in this simple problem tree, there's a kind of clear connection between them all. Let's look at an example. I'm going to use a simplified example here to illustrate my point and also to make sure it actually fits on the slide. Suppose the conservation problem is the declining population of a forest bird species. Perhaps it's an endangered species that you're concerned about. And that it's forest fires that are causing this decline, so they're the threats. And lack of law enforcement is what's behind the forest fires, as well as perhaps limited land for farming. So communities are clearing the forest in order to plant their crops. And together, these are the causes. And I'm sure when you think about your own project, your problem tree will look more complicated than this. And of course, the best way to understand all of these elements is to talk to your stakeholders, and particularly the communities that you're going to be working with. But what are the consequences of this conservation problem? In other words, what would happen if you didn't solve it? So what would happen if you didn't stop the decline of this forest bird species? Perhaps there'd be a local extinction of an endangered bird species. And this is in itself is a worry, is a concern as conservationists. But maybe the species had an important cultural value for local communities. Or maybe it was a useful dispersal agent in the forest, so the forest itself may become more degraded. Well, I hope I've shown you that this approach, by breaking down your problem, the causes, and even looking at what would happen if you didn't solve the problem, is a useful approach. And I hope that you'll be able to share that with your colleagues when you go back to your organisations. And we're going to return to this again later on in the module when we talk about impacts, and later on again in the whole masterclass. Well, of course, real life is far more complex than the diagram I've been showing you. But our aim is to give you some guidance and the tools that you can use to produce your own problem trees that are based on the projects that you're actually aiming to solve. And the other thing is that we should remember is that one single project isn't always going to solve the conservation problem that we are tackling. So you might want to think about how you can divide up the conservation problem into a series of projects that you will do, or perhaps that you and other conservation players out there will do. And that way you can make sure that the project that you're designing is realistic and is achievable. So what have we learned so far? We've learned that we need to identify the problem in the first place. And then we can determine the causes. And we've shown you that a problem tree is a really useful tool to help you do this, particularly if you do it with your team. And that we need to do all of this to write our project proposal. And this includes very often proposals to funders, because they want to understand the underlying issues behind your project. And now it's over to you. So it's time to think about your own project, perhaps one that you're already doing or that you want to do, or you could even do this using a project that you just know of. And it's time for reflection to think about, so what is the conservation problem? How could you define that? How could you write it in one sentence? And then think about what the causes are. List the causes. And then we'll return to all of this later on in the module. Well, you can get more guidance in our course handbook. You already have that. And as we progress through the Moodle, we'll be going into more detail. So, good luck and see you in the next slideshow.